Wear the uniform, carry the trays, and stay out of the way. That's all you're good for now. Those were the cold words of James Whitaker, a man who once swore to love Ayanna Davis. To him, his ex-wife was just a shadow, meant to serve at his lavish wedding to Elowen Clark, a new chapter built on her humiliation. But James didn't know destiny had other plans, because on that wedding day, Ayanna was about to walk in with a surprise that would leave every guest speechless. Sometimes the ones you push down rise in ways you can't imagine. Welcome to Beacon Stories 360. Hit that subscribe button to join our family and drop a comment to tell us where you're watching from. What time is it there? Let's dive into a story where pain turns to power. Ayanna Davis stood frozen in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, the letter trembling in her hands. The paper was crisp, expensive, the kind James Whitaker always used to flaunt his success. Her dark eyes, sharp with the kind of intelligence that could cut through a boardroom, scanned the words again, as if they might rearrange into something less cruel. Wear the uniform, carry the trays, and stay out of the way. It's all you're good for now. The signature at the bottom was James's, bold and careless, like he'd signed a takeout receipt instead of her dignity. Her radiant brown skin flushed hot, but her lips pressed into a tight line. She wouldn't cry, not yet. The apartment smelled of burnt coffee and the lavender candles she'd lit to calm her nerves. It wasn't working. Ayanna set the letter on the counter, next to a stack of unpaid bills stamped red with past due. Her fingers brushed a faded photo taped to the fridge, her and James 5 years ago laughing under a Coney Island sunset. Her braids swung loose back then, her smile wide enough to light up the boardwalk. He'd called her his firecracker, said her eyes could sell any deal. She'd believed him. Fool. She sank into a creaky chair, the memory of that night flooding back. She'd spent hours in their old loft, perfecting a pitch deck for James's startup. Her marketing job had paid the bills while he chased dreams of real estate empires. She'd stayed up nights, tweaking slides, calling investors who'd hung up on him. "You're my rock, Ayanna," he'd said, kissing her forehead. She'd sold her beat-up Honda to cover his first property deposit. When the bank laughed him out, she'd smiled through client dinners, charming suits who'd later sign his contracts. All for him. Now, he was marrying Elowen Clark, the blonde socialite who'd breezed into their lives like a storm. Ayanna's stomach twisted. She could still see Elowen's smirk from 3 months ago, standing in this very apartment, heels clicking on the scuffed hardwood. "Sign the papers, darling," Elowen had said, tossing the divorce envelope like it was junk mail. Her emerald earrings glinted, matching her dress, her confidence. "James needs a woman who can keep up." Ayanna had stood tall, her voice steady despite the knife in her chest. "I built him." Elowen's laugh was sharp, like broken glass. "You were his training wheels. He's riding solo now." Ayanna's hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. She forced a breath, slow and deliberate, and smoothed her navy dress. A thrift store find, simple but sharp, hugging her curves just right. Her braids were pulled back, neat, the way James's mother used to demand. Professional, she'd called it, like Ayanna's natural flair was something to tame. The memory stung, but Ayanna shoved it down. She walked to the mirror, her reflection fierce despite the shadows under her eyes. She tried to smile, fragile but stubborn. "He'll see," she whispered. "He'll see me." The buzzer rang, sharp and jarring. Ayanna's heart skipped. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. A courier, barely out of his teens, thrust an envelope at her. "For Ayanna Davis," he mumbled, already halfway back to his bike. She tore it open, her pulse racing. Another letter from James, this one typed, formal, like a court summons. "You're invited to serve at my wedding to Elowen Clark. Grand Crestwell Hall. Uniform provided. Don't embarrass me." Her throat tightened, a lump she couldn't swallow. Serve. At his wedding? The man she'd loved, the man she'd built, wanted her to bow before his new life. She dropped the letter, her hands shaking. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She pressed her palms to the counter, the cool surface grounding her. Flashbacks hit hard. James coming home late, bourbon on his breath, his suit crisp while her hands smelled of dish soap. "I need more, Ayanna," he'd said, tossing his keys with a clatter. "You're too small time." She'd cooked his favorite, jerk chicken, the recipe her mom taught her. He'd pushed the plate away. You think this impresses me? I'm dining with millionaires now. Her cheeks had burned, but she'd held her ground. I gave up my career for you, James. His laugh was ice. You gave up because you couldn't hack it. Don't kid yourself. She'd sold her car, pawned her mom's sapphire earrings, stayed up nights balancing his books when he couldn't afford an accountant. She'd been his backbone, his spark, his everything, and he'd called her nothing. Ayana's eyes stung, but she blinked hard, refusing tears. She grabbed the photo from the fridge, her fingers tracing the younger, brighter version of herself, the girl who thought love was enough. Not anymore, she said, voice low but steady. She tucked the photo into a drawer out of sight. The lavender candle flickered, casting long shadows on the wall. Ayana stood straighter, her jaw set. James thought he could bury her, make her a footnote in his shiny new life. Elowen thought she could waltz in and erase her. They were wrong. She'd been their foundation once, and she'd build her own now. Her eyes locked on the letter, that smug signature. She picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her pocket. You'll see me, James, she said, her voice a quiet vow, sharp as a blade. You'll see. Ayana Davis gripped the counter at the cramped Manhattan coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine drowning out the chatter around her. Her black apron was stained with milk foam, her braids tucked tight under a hairnet that felt like a leash. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting her radiant brown skin in a harsh glow. She poured a latte, her hands steady despite the whispers slithering through the air. That's James Whitaker's ex, a woman in a sleek blazer muttered to her friend, loud enough to sting. Serving coffee. Talk about hitting rock bottom. Iana's jaw clenched, but she kept her eyes on the foam, swirling it into a perfect leaf. It had been 2 months since James's letter, that cold demand to serve at his wedding. 2 months since she'd tucked away the Coney Island photo and sworn he'd see her strength. But strength didn't pay the bills. James had made sure of that. He'd spread word through his network, whispering to every marketing firm in the city that Ayana was unstable, a liability. She'd sat through interviews, her resume polished, her answers sharp, only to get ghosted. One HR rep, kinder than most, had called her after hours. Off the record, she'd whispered, James Whitaker warned us off, said you'd bring drama. Ayana had thanked her, hung up and stared at her phone until the screen went dark. Now she was here, steaming milk and wiping counters, her marketing degree gathering dust. The shop smelled of burnt grounds and cheap perfume from the lunch crowd. Ayana handed a customer his coffee, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Have a great day, she said, her voice smooth but hollow. The guy didn't look up from his phone. She turned to clean the machine, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her. She'd sold her mom's sapphire necklace last week, wrapping it in tissue before handing it to the pawnshop clerk. I'm sorry, Mama, she'd whispered, the cash barely covering rent. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's stale bagel, but pride kept her standing. The bell above the door jingled. Ayana's heart sank as Elowen Clark glided in, her emerald dress hugging her like it was custom made, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo. She was flanked by 2 women Ayana recognized, old friends from her life with James, now Elowen's loyal audience. Their laughter hit like a slap. Poor Ayana, Elowen said, her voice sweet but sharp, carrying across the shop. Couldn't keep up with a man like James. No wonder he upgraded. The women giggled, their eyes darting to Ayana, who kept her head down, wiping the same spot on the counter until it gleamed. Look at her, one whispered, serving coffee like she was born for it. Ayana's cheeks burned, but she swallowed the lump in her throat, her grip on the rag tightening until her knuckles ached. Elowen sauntered to the counter, her heels clicking like a countdown. A cappuccino, extra foam, she said, her smile a blade. Don't mess it up, darling. Ayana nodded, her face a mask of calm. She steamed the milk, her movements precise, ignoring the way Elowen leaned in, whispering to her friend. It's almost sad, isn't it? She used to think she was somebody. The words cut deep, but Ayana poured the foam with steady hands, sliding the cup across the counter. Enjoy, she said, her voice cool, her eyes meeting Elowen's for a split second. Allowan's smirk faltered, just barely, before she turned away, her laughter trailing like poison. The rest of the shift dragged, each whisper from customers slicing a little deeper. James's ex, they'd say, like her name didn't matter anymore. Ayanna cleared tables, her apron heavy with spilled coffee and her own pride. When the shop finally emptied, she sank into a corner booth, her hands shaking as she untied her hairnet. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through old texts from James. "You're my firecracker," he'd written years ago. Now his last message was a forwarded email from his assistant. "Confirm your attendance as staff for the wedding. Don't be late." She deleted it, her thumb pressing harder than necessary. The door jingled again. Ayanna looked up, expecting another customer, but it was Ms. Lena, her old mentor from her marketing days. Lena's graying curls framed a face that didn't miss a thing, her sharp eyes softening as they landed on Ayanna. "Girl, what are you doing in this apron?" Lena asked, sliding into the booth. Ayanna forced a laugh, brittle and thin. "Gotta eat, Miss Lena." Lena leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "You're bigger than this. I saw you pitch deals that made grown men sign checks. You built that man's empire, and now he's got you pouring his coffee?" Ayanna's eyes stung, but she blinked hard. "He made sure no one would hire me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Lena's lips pressed tight, her gaze fierce. "Then build your own table, Ayanna. Don't wait for a seat at his." She slid a business card across the table. "Lena's friend, a venue owner looking for a manager. Start small, but start. You're not done yet." Ayanna took the card, her fingers tracing the embossed name. Her heart thudded, a spark igniting somewhere deep. She looked up, meeting Lena's eyes. "I'm not," she said, her voice steady now, a vow to herself. The shop's lights buzzed, but Ayanna didn't hear them. She stood, tucking the card into her pocket next to James's letter. Elowin's laughter echoed in her mind, but it didn't break her. Not anymore. She'd been pushed down, but she wasn't staying there. "They'll see," she whispered, her eyes burning with a fire James had forgotten. "They'll all see." Ayanna Davis sat hunched over her laptop in the dim glow of her Brooklyn apartment, the screen casting blue light across her radiant brown skin. Her braids spilled over her shoulders, loose for once, as she clicked through an online course on event planning. The clock read 2 a.m., but sleep wasn't an option. Not when rent was due and James Whitaker's venom still echoed in her ears. His words from the coffee shop. "You're nothing but a shadow now," stung like a fresh cut. She rubbed her eyes, gritty from exhaustion, and muttered, "Keep grinding, Ayanna." The business card from Ms. Lena, her old mentor, sat on the table, its edges worn from her anxious fingers. It was her lifeline, a shot at something bigger. Days earlier, Lena's words had lit a spark. "Build your own table," she'd said, her voice steady as steel. Ayanna had met her at a small office in Harlem, a cramped space stuffed with books and ambition. Lena's friend Marcus owned a rundown venue, a community hall with peeling paint and creaky floors. "He needs a manager who can turn it around," Lena had said, eyeing Ayanna like she could see straight through her doubts. "You're that person." Ayanna had hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I'm down on my luck, Ms. Lena. No one's betting on me." Lena's laugh was sharp, warm. "Bet on yourself, girl. You've got the hustle." Now Ayanna was all in. She'd taken the job, trading her coffee shop apron for a clipboard and a dream. The hall smelled of dust and neglect, but she saw potential in its high ceilings and wide windows. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, painted walls until her arms burned. By day she worked odd jobs, barista shifts, cleaning gigs, even babysitting to cover bills. By night she studied contracts, memorized catering budgets, practiced pitches in front of her cracked bathroom mirror. "You're Ayanna Davis," she'd say, forcing confidence into her voice. "You make magic happen." Her reflection stared back, fierce but tired, her dark eyes holding a fire that refused to die. The city didn't make it easy. At a networking event, she handed out flyers for the hall, her smile bright despite the cold shoulders. A woman in a designer coat glanced at her, then whispered to her friend, "Isn't that James Whitaker's ex? Trying to play businesswoman now?" The words hit like a slap, but Ayanna kept her chin up, offering a flyer. "We're booking for spring," she said, her voice smooth. The woman took it, smirked, and tossed it in the trash as she walked away. Ayana's fingers twitched, but she forced a breath, picturing Lena's face. "Keep moving," she told herself. "They don't get to write your story." Worse were the run-ins with her old crowd. At a farmer's market, she spotted two women who'd once filled her loft with laughter, now Alawan's loyal shadows. They stood by a stall, their voices carrying. "Ayana's still hustling for scraps," one said, eyeing her worn sneakers. "Alawan says she calls James, begging for another chance." Ayana's cheeks burned, her hands tightening around her grocery bag. She hadn't called James once, but the lie stung anyway. She turned away, her heart pounding, and bought a single apple she couldn't really afford. "You're not that girl," she whispered, biting into it, the juice sharp on her tongue. Back at the hall, she threw herself into work. She booked her first event, a small baby shower for a local nurse. Ayana hung dollar store balloons, arranged trays of jerk chicken sliders, and polished every surface until it gleamed. The guests raved, snapping photos, their smiles real. "This place feels like home," the nurse said, hugging her. Ayana's chest swelled, a flicker of pride breaking through the weight of the past months. She pocketed the payment, enough to cover a week's groceries, and sat alone in the hall after, the quiet wrapping around her like a blanket. She traced the edge of a table, her fingers steady. "This is mine," she said softly, the words tasting like hope. But the whispers followed her. At a bodega, a cashier nodded at her. "Heard you're James Whitaker's ex. Tough break." Ayana forced a smile, handing over her last few bucks for milk. "I'm good," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. She walked home, the city's hum loud in her ears. Car horns, distant sirens, life moving on. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You're nobody now, stay that way." Attached was a photo of James and Alawan, laughing at a gala, her emerald dress catching the flash. Ayana's throat tightened, but she deleted the message, her thumb steady. She wouldn't break. That night, she opened her laptop again, the course module glowing. She jotted notes, lighting tips, vendor contracts, her handwriting neat despite her trembling hands. Lena's voice echoed, "Bet on yourself." Ayana looked at the empty hall through her window, its silhouette dark against the city lights. She'd been James's backbone once, his spark when he had nothing. Now she'd be her own. "They'll see," she said, her voice low but fierce, a promise carved in the quiet. The fire in her eyes burned brighter, and for the first time in months, she felt it might just be enough. Ayana Davis stood in the middle of the Harlem Community Hall, her boots echoing on the polished wood floor. The space, once a crumbling relic with chipped paint and dusty corners, now gleamed under her touch. She'd spent weeks scrubbing grime, hanging string lights, and painting walls a warm ivory that caught the morning sun. Her radiant brown skin glowed with sweat as she adjusted a tablecloth, her braids swinging as she moved. The hall smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Ayana's company, Davis Elegance, was no longer just a dream. It was real, booking gigs, turning heads. But the city still whispered her old story, James Whitaker's ex, scraping by. She let them talk. They'd learn soon enough. Her days were a grind. Mornings, she hauled trays at the coffee shop, dodging snide comments from customers who recognized her. "Still pouring coffee, huh?" A guy in a suit smirked, tossing $1 in the tip jar like it was charity. Ayana's smile didn't waver, but her eyes burned. Nights, she pored over spreadsheets, calculating budgets for catering and decor. She'd traded sleep for strategy, learning vendor tricks, and contract clauses from YouTube tutorials. Her apartment was a mess of sticky notes and coffee mugs, but every scribbled idea was a brick in her empire. "Make it work," she muttered, pinning up a sketch for a wedding setup. Her mom's voice echoed in her head. "You're tougher than the toughest storms, baby." The hall's first big win was a quinceañera for a local family. Ayana had strung fairy lights, cooked jerk chicken skewers herself, and charmed the guests with her warm laugh. The birthday girl's mom hugged her, tears in her eyes. "You made my daughter's day magic," she said. Ayana pocketed the check, her heart pounding with pride. Word spread. A book club wanted the hall for a reading, then a small corporate mixer. Each job brought more cash, more contacts. She hired a part-time assistant, Nia, a sharp Brooklyn native who saw through Ayana's calm facade. "You're building something big, boss," Nia said, handing her a coffee during a late-night setup. Ayana nodded, her lips twitching. "Damn right." But the whispers never stopped. At a bodega, she overheard two women from James's circle. "Ayana's playing at business now," one scoffed, clutching her designer purse. "Ilawan says she's desperate, booking cheap gigs in Harlem." Ayana's fingers tightened around a loaf of bread, but she kept her head high, paying the cashier with a steady hand. Later, alone in the hall, she pressed her palms to a table, the wood cool under her skin. "Let them laugh," she whispered. "They're renting my air soon." Her dark eyes glinted, fierce and unyielding. The turning point came on a chilly morning. Nia burst into the hall's tiny office, waving a folder. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice electric. Ayana looked up from her laptop, her braids tucked behind her ears. "What's the deal?" Nia slapped the folder down. "Biggest booking yet. Wedding, high profile, at our hall." Ayana flipped it open, her breath catching. The name stared back. James Whitaker and Aloan Clark. His bold scrawl, her elegant flourish. They'd chosen her venue, the very hall James once mocked her for not affording. Her heart thumped, a drumbeat of rage and triumph. She leaned back, her lips curving into a sharp, dangerous smile. "You good, boss?" Nia asked, eyeing her. Ayana's fingers traced James's signature, her mind racing. She saw him at their old loft, laughing off her dreams. "You're small time, Ayana." She saw Elowen's smirk at the coffee shop, her voice dripping venom. "He upgraded." They thought they'd buried her. They had no idea she'd been building. "Confirm it," Ayana said, her voice low but steady, like a storm gathering strength. Nia hesitated. "You sure? This is their day." Ayana's smile grew sharper. "It's mine too." She stood, walking to the hall's tall windows, the city sprawling below. Harlem's pulse thrummed, street vendors calling, kids laughing, life fighting to be seen. Just like her, she'd poured everything into this place. Her savings, her sleepless nights, her pride. Every polished floorboard, every light bulb was hers. James and Alawan thought they were walking into their triumph, but they'd booked her empire. Ayana's hands steadied, her resolve ironclad. She turned back to Nia, her eyes blazing. "We make it perfect," she said. "No mistakes." Nia nodded, catching the fire in her boss's gaze. Alone again, Ayana touched the folder, James's name staring up like a challenge. She saw the coffee shop, the pawn necklace, the nights she'd cried into her pillow. Then she saw the hall glowing under her hands, the guests who'd thanked her, the future she was carving. "You'll see me," she said, her voice a quiet blade, cutting through the past. The city hummed outside, and for the first time, Ayana felt it humming with her. She wasn't just surviving, she was rising. Ayana Davis moved through the glittering crowd at the Harlem Ballroom, her black and white server's uniform crisp against her radiant brown skin. The Grand Crestwell Hall, her hall, sparkled under chandeliers she'd chosen, its marble floors gleaming from her late-night scrubbing. Her braids were pinned tight, her face a mask of calm as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, but the whispers cut through it all. "That's her, right? James Whitaker's ex?" A woman in a sequined gown murmured, her voice dripping with pity. "Serving at his wedding? Damn, that's cold." Ayana's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward, offering a flute to a guest with a practiced smile. Inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. The rehearsal had been bad enough. James, in his tailored tux, had spotted her the second he walked in, Elowen glittering on his arm like a trophy. "Well, look who's playing servant," he'd said, loud enough for the staff to pause mid-step. His grin was all teeth, sharp and mean. Elowen's laugh had followed, her blonde hair catching the light as she leaned in. "Don't spill anything, darling. You're not cut out for this either." Ayana had nodded, her voice steady. "I'll do my job." But her fingers had twitched around her clipboard, her mind whispering, "Wait for it." Nia, her assistant, had caught her eye, a question in her glance. Ayana had given a slight nod. The plan was in place. Now the wedding night was in full swing. Guests in tuxes and gowns filled her hall, sipping her champagne, dancing to her music. Ayana moved like a shadow, refilling glasses, clearing plates, her every step deliberate. The whispers followed her. She's the ex-wife, right? Serving here? A man in a velvet jacket muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Fitting, I guess, his date replied, smirking. Some people are born to serve. Ayana's cheeks burned, but she bit her tongue, her tray steady. She caught Nia's eye across the room, her assistant's face tight with anger. Ayana shook her head slightly. Not yet. Iloan made her entrance like a queen, her white gown shimmering, her smile practiced to perfection. She glided through the crowd, pausing to let guests admire her. When she spotted Ayana, her eyes lit up with cruel delight. "Oh, Ayana," she called, her voice carrying over the string quartet. "My veil's dragging. Fix it." The room stilled, heads turning. Ayana set her tray on a table, her movements smooth, and knelt beside Eloan. Her fingers adjusted the delicate fabric, her face blank despite the heat crawling up her neck. Eloan leaned down, her whisper sharp for the nearby guests. "This suits you, bowing like this. I'd die before I'd serve at my ex's wedding." Laughter rippled, thin and mean. Ayana stood, smoothing the veil with a steady hand. "All set," she said, her voice cool, her eyes meeting Alowans for a fleeting second. The socialite's smile wavered, but she turned away, basking in the attention. James was worse. He held court near the bar, shaking hands, his laugh loud and easy. He caught sight of Ayana and raised his glass, his voice booming. "We believe in second chances around here," he said to his circle of admirers, their faces flushed with wine. "Some folks are happy as pouring drinks." The group chuckled, their eyes darting to Ayana. She poured champagne for a guest, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Inside, her pulse roared. She remembered the nights she'd balanced his books, the calls she'd made to investors, the cars she'd sold to keep his dream alive. And now this, his wedding, her haul, her humiliation. She caught Nia's eye again, her assistant's fist clenched at her side. Ayana mouthed, "Stick to the plan." The night rolled on, courses served, wine flowing. Ayana moved through it all, her tray a shield, her calm a weapon. A woman in emerald silk leaned toward her friend, her voice carrying. "I heard she begged to work here. James took pity." Ayana's fingers tightened around a flute, but she handed it over with a nod. "Enjoy," she said, her voice soft but steady. The woman barely looked at her. Another guest, a man with a Rolex, whispered, "She's got nerve showing up like this." Ayana kept moving, her heart a steady beat, each pulse pushing her forward. She wasn't breaking. Not tonight. As the toast approached, the energy shifted. The master of ceremonies took the stage, his voice warm over the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise a glass to the bride and groom." James seized the moment, grabbing the mic with a grin that screamed spotlight. "I'll kick this off," he said, the crowd laughing on cue. "Tonight's about love, but it's also about destiny. Some people are built for the big stage." His eyes locked on Ayana, standing by the champagne wall, her tray gleaming. "And some are built to serve." The laughter was thinner this time, edged with unease. A few guests looked down, shifting in their seats. Ayana's hands tightened, her knuckles straining, but her face stayed calm, her eyes burning with a fire only Nia saw. Iloan took the mic next, her voice sugar-sweet. "I'm grateful for every woman who showed me what not to be," she said, her gaze slicing toward Ayana. "I walked through the right door, in a dress that fits." Cheers erupted, glasses clinking. Ayana's chest ached, her silence tasting like iron. She set her tray down, her movements slow, deliberate. Nia stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Boss, you sure about this?" Ayana's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "No mistakes," she said, her eyes fixed on the stage. The MC's voice cut through. "And now, a word from our venue owner, Ayana Davis." The room stirred, whispers rising like a wave. James's smile froze. Eloan's fingers whitened around her glass. Ayana straightened, her heart a steady drum, and stepped toward the stage, her uniform glowing under the lights. The air crackled. She was ready. Ayana Davis stepped onto the stage of the Grand Crestwell Hall, the chandeliers casting a golden glow across her radiant brown skin. Her server's uniform was gone, replaced by a crimson gown that hugged her curves like a declaration of war. Her braids cascaded freely, framing a face that held no trace of the bowing shadow James Whittaker had mocked. The crowd hushed, their whispers dying as her heels clicked against the polished wood. James's smile, smug a moment ago, froze into something brittle. Elowen's grip on her champagne flute tightened, her perfect smile cracking. Ayanna set her folded apron on the podium, her hands steady, and took the microphone. The room held its breath. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Thank you for trusting us with your night." The guests relaxed slightly, expecting something polite, forgettable. But Ayanna's eyes swept the room, locking on James, then Elowen. "There's something you should know about this house." Nia at the back straightened, her nod sharp. The AV tech, Jamal, dimmed the lights to a soft glow, the chandeliers twinkling like stars. Ayanna's lips curved, not a smile but a promise. "This hall belongs to me." The room gasped, a collective intake of air that echoed off the marble. Glasses paused midair. James barked a laugh, too loud, too sharp. "Cute," he said, waving a hand like she was a kid putting on a play. "She's joking." Elowen gripped his arm, her whisper hissing. "What the hell is she doing?" Ayanna didn't flinch. She raised the mic closer. "This ballroom, every light, every glass of champagne you're sipping, it's mine. Davis Elegance, my company, built this night." The screen behind her flickered to life. Jamal's cue perfect. A deed flashed up. Grand Crestwell Hall, owned by Ayanna Davis Holdings, LLC, signed, stamped, undeniable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, heads craning to read her name. James's jaw dropped, his face reddening. "That's fake," he shouted, pointing a shaky finger. "She forged it." Elowen's laugh was shrill, desperate. "She's delusional." Ayanna's gaze stayed calm, her voice steady. "Receipts don't lie." The screen shifted, showing another deed, then another. Venues across the city, all hers. Then came the emails. One from James to a marketing firm. "Ayanna Davis is poison. Don't hire her." Another from Elowen to the hall's booking office. "Ensure the servers look humble. James wants her in her place." A collective gasp swept the room. A woman in a silk gown covered her mouth, muttering, "My God." Ayanna stood taller, her crimson gown catching the light like fire. "You tried to erase me," she said, her eyes boring into James. "You spread lies, blacklisted me, made me serve your champagne to prove I was nothing." Her voice softened, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "But while you laughed, I built. This hall, these staff, this empire, it's mine." Miss Lena rose from the crowd, her gray curls proud, her voice firm. "I'm her investor. Every word is true." The guests whispered louder now, their faces shifting from shock to disgust. James's business partners exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing. Elowen's face drained of color, her veil slipping as she leaned forward. "This is a lie," she snapped, her voice cracking. The screen flashed again, text between her and James. "Make her serve," Elowen had written. "Break her." Another from James. "She'll bow on my wedding day." The room groaned, the air thick with betrayal. A man in a tux, one of James's investors, stood abruptly, his face dark. "We'll talk tomorrow, Whittaker," he said, his voice ice cold, and stormed out. Two more followed, their chairs scraping the floor. Elowen spun on James, her eyes wild. "You said you deleted those," James snapped back. "You told me to make her bow." Their perfect facade crumbled, their voices rising like enemies, not lovers. Ayanna's gaze softened, but her stance was iron. "Service isn't shame," she said, her voice steady, resonant. "It's skill. The shame is using people and calling it love." The words landed heavy like a gavel. A server in the corner wiped her eyes, standing taller. Naya's face broke into a proud grin. Guests murmured, some nodding, others looking away, uncomfortable with the truth. James lunged toward the stage, his face red with rage. "I'll sue you for this," he shouted. Ms. Lena's voice cut through from the balcony. "With what money, James? Your investors are walking out." The silence that followed was deafening. Elowen ripped off her veil, the fabric tearing with a sharp rip. "You humiliated me," she screamed at James, her voice shrill in front of everyone. You told me to push her, he barked back. They were no longer bride and groom, just two people clawing at each other as their world collapsed. Ayanna set the microphone down gently, her eyes calm but blazing. This could go on, she said to the room, but I've said enough. She turned to James and Alowan one last time. You taught me betrayal, and betrayal made me stronger. She stepped off the stage, her crimson gown flowing like a banner. Her staff parted for her, their faces reverent. Some clapped softly, a quiet rebellion. Nia fell in beside her, a shield of loyalty. At the hall's entrance, reporters pressed against the velvet rope, shouting for a statement. Ayanna paused, her expression serene. Let the guests enjoy their night, she said, her voice steady as she walked into the cool Harlem air. Behind her, James's shouts mixed with Alowan's cries, their empire unraveling. Ayanna didn't look back. She'd stolen the light, and it was hers to keep. Ayanna Davis walked the polished floors of the Grand Crestwell Hall, the Harlem night quiet around her. The chandeliers were dark now, the wedding chaos of James Whittaker and Alowan Clark a fading echo. Her crimson gown was gone, swapped for a simple black sweater and jeans, her braids loose and swaying. Her radiant brown skin caught the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Her steps steady as she traced the edge of a table she'd sanded herself. The hall smelled of lemon polish and victory. This was hers. Every beam, every bulb, every inch built from her sweat and stubborn heart. She pressed her palm to the wood, feeling its warmth. I did this, she whispered, her voice soft but fierce, a vow answered. The fallout from the wedding hit like a storm. James's empire crumbled overnight. Investors pulled out, their emails curt and cold. Partnership terminated. His real estate deals tanked. His phone was silent where it once buzzed with offers. The city's elite, who'd clapped for him hours ago, now whispered his name with scorn. He blacklisted his own ex, they said at brunches, shaking their heads. Tried to break her. Alowan fared no better. Her socialite crown slipped, her invites to galas drying up. The women who'd laughed with her at the coffee shop now dodged her calls. A gossip blog ran a headline. Golden couple's wedding implodes, ex-wife steals the show. Ayanna didn't read it. She didn't need to. Her own star was rising. Davis elegance was the talk of Harlem, then Manhattan, then beyond. Clients flooded her inbox, booking the hall for anniversaries, fundraisers, even a tech startup's launch party. Your venue's got soul, a bride told her, signing a contract for a spring wedding. Ayanna smiled, her eyes bright. That's the plan. She hired more staff. Nia stepped up as her right hand. Jamal took charge of tech, and a crew of servers who'd clapped for her that night became her backbone. They called her boss with pride, their loyalty hard-earned. She signed paychecks at a desk she'd found at a thrift store, her handwriting steady, her heart full. The city's whispers had changed. At a bodega, the cashier grinned as she handed over her coffee. Heard you shut down that wedding, Miss Davis. Respect, Ayanna laughed, tucking a braid behind her ear. Just doing my job. But the pride in her chest burned warm. At a networking event, a woman in a sharp blazer approached, her handshake firm. You're Ayanna Davis, right? I want your hall for my firm's gala. No pity in her eyes, just admiration. Ayanna handed her a card, her smile genuine. Let's make it happen. The room buzzed, her name no longer tied to James but standing alone. A force. She bought another venue, a smaller hall in Brooklyn, its bones solid but begging for her touch. She walked its dusty floors at night, sketching plans for lights and layouts. Her hands, once raw from scrubbing, now held a pen with confidence. She thought of the coffee shop, the pawn necklace, the nights she'd cried until her throat ached. Each scar had built this. She'd been James's spark once, his foundation when he had nothing. Now she was her own. You didn't break me, she said to the empty hall, her voice echoing off the walls. One evening, Ms. Lena stopped by, her gray curls catching the light as she surveyed the Cresswell Hall. You did it, girl, she said, her voice thick with pride. Ayanna handed her a coffee, the same brand they'd shared in that cramped office months ago. Couldn't have started without you, she said, her eyes soft. Lena waved her off, but her smile was wide. You had the fire. I just gave you a match. They stood together, watching the hall's windows reflect the city's glow. They thought they'd bury you, Lena said. Ayana's lips twitched. They just gave me ground to grow. The memory of the wedding night lingered, not as pain but as fuel. She saw James's red face, Eloin's torn veil, the guests' shocked faces as her screen lit up with truth. She'd walked away head high, leaving their chaos behind. Now she stood in her empire, the floors carrying her rise. Her phone buzzed. A new booking, another client won by her name alone. She answered, her voice calm, professional, but inside her heart sang. Betrayal had cut her deep, but resilience had carved her path. Ayana turned off the hall's lights, the darkness soft around her. She stepped outside, the Harlem air cool against her skin. The city hummed, car horns, laughter, life pushing forward. She touched the doorframe, her fingers lingering. This is mine, she said, her voice a quiet triumph. The stars above blinked as if in agreement. She'd been broken once, but she'd built something unbreakable. James and Alawan were footnotes now, their story a cautionary tale. Ayana's was just beginning, and it was hers alone. That's the story of Ayana Davis, a woman who turned betrayal into a crown and built an empire from the ashes of her pain. The lesson here hits hard. Resilience can transform your darkest moments into your greatest victories, no matter how deep the hurt or how loud the doubters. When life tries to break you, you can choose to rise, brick by brick, until you're standing taller than those who tried to bury you. So let me ask you, what's a moment in your life where you turned pain into power? Drop it in the comments. Your story might just spark someone else's fire. Next time, we're diving into another tale of comeback and courage, one that'll leave you cheering. Thank you for watching, for sharing this journey with us. It means the world. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.